So my name is Sharma. I work at Atlassian. I'm head of product for a particular business unit. You might wonder, like, why is a product manager giving an engineering talk? And that's because most of my career, I've been in engineering, product, switched around. So, and the talk I'm going to give is not necessarily about engineering teams. It's about scaling teams in general. But since most tech teams tend to be large engineering, it applies mostly to engineering. But think of it more broadly. Okay. So the reason is that if anyone asks you a broad question in life, one mentor often told me the correct answer is not to give the answer. The correct answer is always, it depends. And then the smart questioner should ask you, it depends on what? And your follow-up should then get into the real meat of the question. Right? That's how any intelligent conversation about any broad topic should go. So first of all, if somebody asks you, like, how do you scale engineering team? Your correct answer should be, it depends. And really now get into it depends on what, right? Depends obviously on the size of the company. So if you're scaling a company like HP, which is where I started my career with over 100,000 people, they might be adding 5,000 people every year, but that's only 5%, right? So their curve looks like that. I work at Atlassian now, which is what I would call almost a giant company, close to like $70, $80 billion in market cap. The curve is different. I worked at Myntra, it's very different, and so on and so forth, right? And most startups, you scale and then you die, right? And if mid-sized companies they go through these ups and downs, like I worked at Cult, where you go through COVID and layoffs and all of those things. So scaling means very, very different things for companies of different sizes. We'll talk more about that. It also, you will hear in your career, many of you are younger in your career than myself, you'll go through lots of mentors, lots of people with experience like myself, and they will give you all kinds of thumb rules. And they are frankly always conflicting. I always used to sit in talks like this and have somebody experienced come and say, oh, speed is important. No, quality is important. No, it's what really matters is to hire the best people. Or, do this, do that. That's the most important thing. And frankly, it's all BS, right? Because it really depends on the context. I've been in gaming companies where quality is absolutely not important. It's not because they don't care. It's because it's just not important, right? I've been in media companies. I've been in B2B companies where you have to do things very thoughtfully and so on, right? So the goals are also different. For an NVIDIA or a hardware chip company, backward compatibility is super paramount, right? If you're building a hardware like a car, safety is paramount. So the purpose of your engineering team is so different. You cannot apply principles like you saw on the previous page across all teams, right? So if this is so complicated and there's no answer, what is this talk even about, right? I can just say, oh, it depends on a lot of factors. And, sorry, there's no good answer, right? So what do we do? Like, what's the purpose of this talk? Like, what do we even... If you join a new company and you're a leader and your business head, your CEO says, you've got to scale the engineering team. How do you even go about it, right? How do you think about that problem? So the first and the most, the way I would advise you to do it is what I know as the Gurukul model, the apprenticeship model, which is that if you're joining a new space, a new domain, then go and talk to the best experts in that area and learn the thumb rules that are particular to that area. So instead of applying thumb rules that you've learned and assuming that those thumb rules work across industries, across sizes, across different verticals, it won't work that way, right? So you have to learn from the experts in that area, not experts like me, right? And I would advise that because all of these thumb rules are very, very domain specific, choose your career in a way that you specialize in one domain and in one size. That's good career advice because then you get the compounding benefits. Okay. So that's the approach, the process to your career that I think is the most smartest and the wisest. That is not the career choice I used. Okay? I use the engineering model, okay, which is that let's figure out what is the first principles ways of all orgs. Okay, there has to be something common. So, for example, if you ask LLM, it can know everything about everything. Why? Because there's an underlying model. So how do engineers tackle the problem? They look at creating a model of reality, right? And then you run all the inputs. Let's run this org, right, through this model, and we'll see what happens. Your company might succeed or fail. And then you tune the model. Now, that's a very costly process because we're not talking of even an LLM. You're talking of like 500 people through an org. That's obviously not doable. Right? You can't run orgs through a model. Right? What do you need? You need something to model tune orgs. Right? You need to have all of these different industries, B2B software, B2B hardware, B2C service, B2C hardware, all of these different industries, all of these different sizes. And you need somebody who has gone through all of these different career choices. And that person has to be stupid enough to change their industries and sizes of the company many times in their career. Well, unfortunately, you have such a person like myself who has actually done this, right? So through some twist of fate, I have managed to work in many different industries, in many different sizes. And what I'm about to tell you is my abstracted learnings of what is common across all of these different verticals, as well as these different sizes, okay? And this is something I would not suggest for you as a career because, as I mentioned before, you don't get any compounding benefits. Every time you change sizes or industries, you have to relearn all the different thumb rules. You have to relearn all the different ways in which you work in that business and what's more important versus not, okay? But there is some advantage to it as well, which is that you understand the first principles about how to go about building an org. Okay, so the rest of the slide is about that. Any questions so far? Okay, so here's the meat of the talk. So how do engineers look at all problems, right? You build a model for it. And a model is, I have to design a function, a module, that takes some inputs and creates some outputs, right? This is all computer science. This is all what engineers do, right? This is all mathematics. This is the core of it, right? Modeling. And model is never precise. A model is never correct. All models are wrong, but models are useful, right? Like Newtonian mechanics, Newton's model is a model. It's actually incorrect, but it is useful, right? So we're going to come up with a useful model, not necessarily a precisely correct model, okay? So here's the fundamental model of an org. What an org does, and this is for all teams, all businesses, they take ideas, talent, people mostly, and funds, and creates two things: product, new products, and profits or revenue, right? That's basically what all orgs are meant to do. We tend to glorify many other things. Oh, we're going to create a family of team and people, and we're going to have a culture, and we're going to have all these things. But fundamentally, this is what it does. Okay. But now when we get into the computer sciencey aspect of it, it's not a stateless function. It is actually a stateful function. What that means is, it has, while you're doing this, you're building up two things. The first is a customer base. And the second thing is assets. Assets is very important. Assets are things like a brand. It's like your factories. It's like your warehouses. It's your inventory. And in software companies, it's your code base. It's what remains if all of you current employees in your company were to leave and a new set of employees were to join. It's the thing that remains. Brand is very important. Code base is very important. IP is very important. These are the assets you're building up while you're churning through ideas, talent, and funds to create product and revenue. The assets and the customers are what remains. That's what builds up, okay? And you have some headwinds. And the headwinds is like the clock in the CPU. It's time, okay? Time decays everything. It decays your funds. It decays your assets. It decays your customers. It decays your ideas. If you don't act on an idea now, you say, oh, I'll work on that idea a month later or a year later, the idea would have decayed in value. Okay? So this is the fundamental model of an org. Okay? Everything else is fluffy, non-mathematical, non-scientific, right? Now, if you dive into the org, much like if you dive into a machine, you'll see a CPU and you'll see an ALU and you'll see the RAM and so on. Inside an org, there's three fundamental parts. I've used the word dev here, but I mean dev more generally. I like better the word NPD as it's used in FMCG companies. NPD means new product development. Okay? It's not that all devs will be in this part. Dev here means new product development. Then there is a control part. Control part, think of it as management, but it means parts of all of you, even those who are not in managers, who are deciding what to do. Okay? And the last is operations. Operations is all the stuff that's used to take what you already have and sell it and make revenue. So this includes sales, most of marketing. There's a bit of marketing in dev as well, but solutions, support, supply chain, warehouses, delivery, all of those things in e-commerce companies. In software companies, it's things like DevOps. You often do RTB stuff, run the business stuff, refactoring, tech debt. All of that comes in ops. I'm not saying all the engineers are in dev and all the other folks are in other areas. Engineers are across all of these areas. Okay? These are the jobs to be done in some sense of an org. You have to make new products, you have to make decisions, and you have to make profits. Okay? So these are the three parts of an org. So this is the machine, the model of any org. Okay? Now let's apply this model on those scenarios. So this is a mnemonic I like to think of, right? To just remember the dev, control, and ops division. Think of it as a vehicle, and the front wheel is the dev. It explores new areas, builds new products, prone to failure, right? The back wheel is where the power comes in. That's what takes you places. That's what makes your profits, right? And the rider, the brain of the rider, is the control. You need these three parts for the org machine to work. So let's look at an early org. And this doesn't apply to all early orgs in all industries, but typically to early orgs in software tech-oriented companies. What happens in these companies? These companies' number one mission is to convert ideas to product. That's all. And its singular focus has to be to get to product market fit. Everything else, all the other arrows in that model are peripheral and sacrificable. Talent, it's totally fine to lay off your entire team and start anew. It's funds. You don't have much funds. You don't need it. You don't need revenue. You don't need customers. In fact, many times in startups, you'll find that they realize that this particular product that I'm doing is not the right one. Sacrifice and jettison the code base. You jettison your customers that are there. So the only thing you're focused on, the only goal is to convert ideas to a winning product. Okay? And hence, the dev side of the org, the design side of the org, the creative side of the org is paramount. And that's where you should invest. Okay? So knowing the inputs and outputs and what the goal of the org is makes the rest of the design of the org follow. Okay? And hence, your org design would typically, once you know these arrows and which arrow is going where, you say, okay, then I need to build a consolidated org. I don't need to have many teams divided here and there and so on. I need to put them all in one place, one team building one product with shared knowledge, shared rituals, common culture, all of that is very important. And the closer it is to market, okay, the better the ideas will be, and hence the better the product will be. When I say understanding of the market, it means this row. It doesn't mean customer inward. So you're not necessarily having to listen to customers as much as you have to listen to market. Your customers can lead you in the wrong direction at this stage of the company. Okay? because you might have 1, 2, 3 customers, and they will make you follow into a direction that's specific for them. So understanding the market and market understanding is way more important than customer understanding. Let's look at another org, a mature org. Here, you're not converting ideas to product. You already have a product. You have a set of products. What you're fundamentally doing is you're converting assets, your brand, your code base, the stuff you already have, into profits. So you're trying to build an org which takes from this arrow and puts it here. And the input for that is not new ideas. No, you should be kind of damping down on new ideas at this stage. What you need to be doing is customer requirements coming in. Your existing customers will tell you where to go because you have enough of them. Microsoft doesn't need any new customers. They have all of the Fortune 10,000. What they now need to understand is what are the requirements of these existing customers that I can sell more stuff to or enhance my products to. So typically here, the new stuff you're building is largely around pricing and packaging and additions and those kinds of things, which are not about new product development. Apple hasn't launched a new product in, I think, 12 years. But new additions of the products, new features in those products, they all keep coming in. Okay? So what you have to understand at this stage is primarily I need to invest in the operational side of the business. Better sales and marketing tools. Better systems to allow customer requirements to flow in. My operational RTB, refactoring, all of this becomes much more important. And that's where the org investments go. Also, you need to build subcultures in the team. Why? Because you need to align the teams appropriate to the other business functions. So, for example, the ops side of the house needs to be aligned with the supply chain side, sales and marketing side, and so on. They should sit with them. They should form business units that are coalesced with them. Whereas there might be still a small dev, new product development side, and they need to be closer to the market. So probably closer to product marketing. Sit and interact with them very differently. Okay? But this all varies by industry. You have to, whenever you drop into a new industry as a leader, you have to look at where are the areas, what's most important. So for example, if you were in the movie industry or in the fashion industry, you can't rest on your list of products because people want change in movies. Hat ke dikhao kuch, right? So every year, a fashion company has to come up with a new set of products. That's bad, right? Because I can't leverage my assets that I have. I don't have any steady IP. I don't have my steady set of customers. I can't rely that, these are the set of people who watched the movie last year, they're going to watch the new movie this year. So here, I'm a mature company, I'm Warner Brothers, and yet every year I have to come up with new product. Okay, so this kind of changes the dynamic. So if you are in this situation, then you have to say, oh, okay, then I have to create this stuff, and I have to figure out how to build this org to take ideas, talent, and funds to create here, even though I'm mature. So what do you do? So if you're Warner Brothers, what you'll try to do is you'll try to assetify things, because being in the assets and customer side is always advantageous, rather than having to do the struggle every year of coming up with new ideas, right? How do you assetify movies? You create sequels, you license brands, you do those things. So that's why you see Avengers number 4 or whatever, Police Academy number 6, right? So because they've assetified it, and you lock up talent. So you've taken up talent, Tom Cruise, and locked him up for 6 movies. So you've assetified Tom Cruise, right? This is what fashion companies do as well, by the way. So your goal as a mature org is to go from hard dev work to easier ops work. This is the fundamental nature of all orgs. Now, it's harder to do in some industries. It's easier to do in other industries. But without learning what the dynamic is, you'll never be able to design the org, because you don't know the inputs and you don't know the outputs. So this is the mnemonic I use, right? Initially, in the early days, you're like that. all R&D heavy, NPD heavy, design heavy. You're focused on the front wheel. And you have to slowly become a tractor where it's mostly operations, heavy on the backside, right? That's where most of the work is getting done. The front side is there, a little bit steering here and there, but mostly you're going on a straight line. Okay. Now, let's look at a case study. Myntra. I was there from 2012 to 2018, the journey, right? And I want you to look at it. I've talked to people like, oh, what happened at Myntra? And people often look at these changes that happen and say, oh, okay, yeah, then you did this, then you did this, so this, then that, then this, right? And that's what any story of any company looks like if you just follow it. It's a this and then that happened, right? But if you look at it through the lens of the model, you'll see what's actually happening, right? There's a pattern to this. There's a method to the madness, right? So what happened in Myntra? 2012, 2013, 2014, acquisition by Flipkart, Walmart, etc., and then, scaled up, right? So 2012, still trying to find product market fit, just about found product market fit in selling branded shoes. That's, by the way, the start of Myntra, selling Nike, Puma shoes to men, right? That's finally where it cracked the code, right? Otherwise, people used to think, why won't I just go to the local shop and buy something? But it's not easy to get Nike, Puma shoes everywhere across the country, right? That was where it cracked. It was doing about 20 million a year. Then started selling apparel, found branded apparel was another area where people had needs, grew to 70 million. Mobile came in, started private labels, grew. UX became the main thing for Myntra, and then innovated a lot in mobile UX, grew to 500 million. By the time it left, it's about $1 billion in GMV, and had gone into tier 2 and marketing. Org. Started out 50 people, 1 CTO myself, 3 engineering managers. By 2013, now it's about 120 engineers, have 2 VPs. Now it's breaking up storefront and operations, right? You start to see dev and ops getting divided, right? Then 2014, now there's 3 VPs, storefront, ops, and you start seeing analytics. What is analytics? It's control, right? Okay. And they are starting to sit on different floors. And different floors is important because on each of those floors are the equivalent business teams. The storefront team is sitting next to the marketing team. The ops team is sitting next to the supply chain team. And the control team is sitting next to finance and strategy. Okay. Extremely important. Huge pushback in the company, right? But why is this important? Once you know the model, you start to understand why this change is important. And then you start ramping up ops. By the time I left, ops was, I think, 70, 80% of the engineers. Why? Because that's where the real money gets made. And these people have to be process-minded, efficiency-minded, getting things, squeezing the last dollar out. Not the same in storefront, not the same in marketing. They have to have a very different mindset. Okay? And by the 2018, most of the focus was on internal tools, processes, domain experts, hiring a new CTO, my own replacement I hired, and so on, because the other part of the journey is very different. Okay, so this is the journey. Once you look at this with the lens of the model, it starts sounding and appearing very different than if you just read it like that. Oh, this and then this, then this. Okay? So all this is the past. A model is only as good as its power to predict the future. Right? Otherwise, you can take any model and retrofit it to the past. So I might just be rationalizing the heck out of everything that just happened. Right? So I'm going to make some predictive power. Okay? And here's what I predict. I predict that the dev and the ops side of the houses will now shrink. Talent will be less and less needed. The new power center in the org will be the control side. Okay? This means that business scaling will no longer require as many engineers, as many sales, as many marketing people as in the past. And what will become more and more important is data analytics, agents, and managing across all of these workers, both human and non-human. This org has not been invented yet, but it will be. And actually, I had written up an article in 2018, by the way, on what I think will happen to orgs. You can look it up in Medium for those who want more details about this. It's called the autopilot company. What it means is, nowadays you can run airplanes which are run on autopilot, right? And I was designing the org as it would look 10 years from then, in 2018, that I called the autopilot company, which a company that could run itself without a human being. And now I started to see this happen. Now there are many 50 or less people companies now that are all more than a unicorn. And I think we are only about 5 to 10 years away from having the less than 10% company that does over $1 billion in revenue. Okay, I think we're not far away from there. So this is the last slide. People ask me, like, why Atlassian? What's Atlassian's role in all of this? The simple answer is work management is what we do. That's what Atlassian is known for. And obviously, what I have been just telling you about is building the new operating system for work, right? How do you manage work across humans is what Atlassian does. And the extension of that is how do you manage work between humans and non-humans? So how do you design an org for this future? Which is, how do I build the autopilot company? What is the operating system for that? So we are building that. We have already had some talks about it. We call it the system of work. You can think of it as the work operating system as well. So if you're interested, learn more about the stuff we've already published, or come and join us and work with us.